I struggled with even how to start this video because all I could really think to say was, these evil mother. My name is Brittany Page. This is the Page Perspective. Donald Trump signed an executive order yesterday, and through this one simple action, he's going to kill people, devastate communities, and make our homelessness crisis much worse. I read this executive order in disbelief, not that this administration would do this. Of course, we expect this administration to be callous against evidence-based solutions and eager to criminalize people living in poverty and lock them away. But I continue to be amazed at how far we have fallen and how fast. We're going to go through what you need to know about this, and I'm going to link to all of my sources in the description as always. And I genuinely wish that more people were talking about this, so please share this video with your communities. The executive order, quote, ending crime and disorder on America's streets, builds off of the 2024 SCOTUS decision in Grants Pass v. Johnson that gave the green light to cities eager to punish the homeless for sleeping outside, even when they have nowhere to go. It opened the door for cities to criminalize people living in poverty, to arrest and ticket them for sleeping outside. And according to the ACLU, since that decision, 320 bills have been introduced across the country to criminalize homelessness, and 220 of those bills passed. And a lot of this is built on long-term conservative activism behind the scenes, working to criminalize homelessness, specifically from a conservative group called the Cicero Institute. And through this continued work behind the scenes, we get this executive order where Donald Trump writes in section 1, quote, endemic vagrancy, disorderly behavior, sudden confrontations, and violent attacks have made our cities unsafe. The number of individuals living on the streets in the United States on a single night during the last year of the previous administration, 274,224, was the highest ever recorded. And I want to pause here to note that it's interesting that the Trump administration is choosing to focus on the count specifically for individuals who were living unsheltered during the point in time count last year, meaning literally on the street, outside, rather than the total number of unhoused, which of course was nearly 800,000 people, a number that is certainly an undercount, by the way, given the exclusion of people who are living in their cars or living in predatory extended stay motels or couch surfing with friends and family. But they don't want to talk about that. No, they don't want to talk about how their policy choices are making life more unaffordable and pushing people closer and closer to the brink of homelessness, or actually shoving them over the edge into homelessness. What do they want to talk about? Well, I'm sure you can guess what's coming next. Quote, the overwhelming majority of these individuals are addicted to drugs, have mental health conditions, or both. Nearly 2/3 of homeless individuals report having regularly used hard drugs like methamphetamines, cocaine, or opioids in their lifetimes. An equally large share of homeless individuals reported suffering from mental health conditions. The federal government and the states have spent tens of billions of dollars on failed programs that address homelessness, but not its root causes, leaving other citizens vulnerable to public safety threats. Right. You know, it's always going to come back to some just world hypothesis nonsense where the people in power try to convince us that the people who are languishing in poverty deserve it because they made poor choices. They chose to use drugs, you see. They don't want to talk about housing affordability. They don't want to talk about the 53% of people working while living in homeless shelters or the 40% of unsheltered people working while living on the street. So let's talk about the facts here. Let's turn to the data. Let's look at the research from the largest representative study of homeless people in decades from UC San Francisco. The director of the UCSF Benioff Homelessness and Housing Initiative and senior author of this research, Margot Kushel, says that most people who are homeless are not using drugs regularly. And you'll see here, less than half of people experiencing homelessness regularly used illicit drugs in the prior 6 months. Only around 37% reported regular drug use in the prior 6 months, and 25% had never used drugs at any point in their lifetime. But the two most important things to highlight about this research are, one, the authors noting that homelessness drives drug use because it's actually used as a coping strategy, and two, a significant percentage of people who do report using also report that they have been unable to access treatment. And me referencing these numbers is not me saying, substance use and mental illness are not a problem within the homeless population. Of course, people who are living on the streets are struggling with these issues. Not everyone, but some of them, yes. Just like people who are housed. Because drug use and mental health conditions are not only struggles for the homeless. But what should we do to solve those problems? Invest in a police infrastructure that will throw them into cages? No. You just heard from that research that many people who struggle with substance use on the street are not able to access treatment. Now, I wonder why that might be. Could it be a policy choice? Could it be a funding issue? Could it be that, as we see in the Washington Post reporting, quote, the Trump administration has slashed more than $1 billion in COVID-era grants administered by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and is proposing to slash hundreds of millions more in agency grants? An agency that is now in crisis because of these cuts. Medicaid is the single largest payer of behavioral health services, including substance use treatment in this country. I used to work in a mandated treatment program in a treatment court where Medicaid funding was central to the work that we did. I'm still close to people who are clinicians, and I can tell you that after Donald Trump signed his tax and spending bill on July 4th, clients are now asking whether they will still have coverage, including for substance use treatment. If you actually wanted to help people who are struggling with substance use on the streets, you would fund treatment, not prisons. But no, this administration is so committed to cutting billions from Medicaid that they don't care about the impact. And briefly on that note, one study recently found that Donald Trump's Medicaid cuts could result in more than 1,000 additional deaths each year, as well as 100,000 more hospitalizations every year, with nearly 2 million people opting to delay seeking medical care because they can't afford it or they can't access it. And this would include people who cannot get treatment for mental health conditions and for substance use. So let's hop back over to this executive order briefly before talking about the main problem here, the lack of funding or even discussion regarding affordable housing in this country, which is driving our homelessness crisis. Quote, shifting homeless individuals into long-term institutional settings for humane treatment through the appropriate use of civil commitment will restore public order. Surrendering our cities and citizens to disorder and fear is neither compassionate to the homeless nor other citizens. My administration will take an approach focused on protecting public safety. The assumption that everyone experiencing homelessness meets criteria for involuntary commitment is disgusting and terrifying. That this administration is eager to violate human rights is certainly not a surprise. Of course, there are people who need a higher level of care, who need long-term institutionalization, but this is not an administration eager to parse through who needs that and who doesn't. This is about rounding up people who live in poverty, period, and using words like compassion when talking about this plan is particularly nauseating because, again, this is all a choice, and it is most certainly not a compassionate one. Do you know how much money was budgeted for new affordable housing in 2023? $12.8 billion. Do you know what was just budgeted for building detention centers for immigrants rounded up by ICE without due process? $45 billion. If this administration cared about the homelessness crisis, cared about solving it, do you think they would choose to spend 4 times the cash on detention centers than what they budgeted for housing? Policy choices. And just a brief shout out to author Brian Goldstone, who I interviewed a couple months ago, for bringing these numbers to my attention through a post on Blue Sky. Now, I know we've gone through a lot already, but I want you to be fully in the know here. I want you to be armed with facts that you can take out with you into your communities. And I want to briefly read this from the American Immigration Council. So you have some more numbers here, okay? Trump's budget bill, quote, provides $170.7 billion in additional funding for immigration and border enforcement related activities to the Department of Homeland Security and its sub-agencies, Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection, as well as for the Department of Defense for its activities related to military's presence along parts of the southern border. The budget bill implicitly drives dramatic changes to immigration policy through the spending of federal tax dollars, because these funds are provided through reconciliation and not the regular appropriations process. They do not include directives about how the funds must be used, which prevents members of Congress from conducting meaningful oversight. Importantly, these funds all need to be spent by September 30th, 2029, but the agencies receiving them have significant discretion as to how to allocate them across the next 51 months. $170 billion. Because a large majority of this country can't tackle their racist beliefs, we are now stuck in a situation where many billions of dollars are being sent to terrorize people who aren't white, with 72% of people detained by ICE having no criminal record at all, according to government data. Money that could be spent on, you guessed it, affordable housing, substance use treatment, mental health treatment. Listen, I can't even get into all of the terror included in this executive order. I've only read to you the beginning here, and we're already this deep into the problems. From putting harm reduction in quotation marks, like it's some fake concept rather than an essential evidence-based approach to substance use treatment, or putting housing first in quotation marks and misrepresenting it when it is, again, an essential evidence-based practice to addressing homelessness. There's one part in here, one more part. I just can't stop thinking about this. The Attorney General shall, quote, assess federal resources to determine whether they may be directed toward ensuring, to the extent permitted by law, that detainees with serious mental illnesses are not released into the public because of a lack of forensic bed capacity at appropriate local, state, and federal jails or hospitals. What in the hell does this mean? Warehousing people? Using those billions of dollars in the new detention facilities to disappear people living in poverty? We're already seeing reckless human rights violations, violations of due process for undocumented people, as well as those with citizenship. So how are we supposed to believe this administration will follow any sort of principles related to preventing human rights violations when it comes to this plan for the unhoused? I can't even describe the level of rage that I feel. I may, at this point in this video, have a rage rash on my neck. I don't know. I hope I do, because I want people to see the rage here, because I hope you feel it too. I hope you know that you're not alone. Under the guise of public safety, this administration is prepared to amp up their assaults on human and civil rights. And so this is what they want. They want to push more people into poverty. They want to push people living in poverty out of sight in the form of involuntary commitment for poverty, or by tossing them away in a cage. And they want the rest of us to accept it. I don't. I reject the propaganda that tells me that there's something unique and special about me that allows me to live in a house and not on the street. I'm lucky. I'm no different than anyone who's living on the street, and I know that I'm not immune from ending up there myself should enough tragedy happen in my life. And what would I want for myself then? What would I want for someone that I love? What have I wanted for my clients? What do I want for the people I work with now? What would I want for you? What would I want for anyone? To have help, to be met with understanding, to be supported. To live in a society that does not strip billions from healthcare, food assistance, funding for affordable housing and mental health treatment and addiction treatment in order to explode our police state and criminalize poverty, and instead makes policy choices that improve all of our lives, because this does not make us safer. The safest communities are those with the most resources, where the citizenry have their needs met. So please reject this attempt to otherize those in poverty. Our solidarity does not rest with the billionaires walking our halls of power, dehumanizing the vulnerable. Our solidarity is and must remain with their targets. And while it feels like this battle is one that we're losing, much of this fight is in the ideas, in what ideas we adopt and promote. So it matters very much that we reject the propaganda and stand in solidarity with those most at risk. What do you think? Call and leave me a fewer than 3-minute voicemail at 202-656-1509. Or send an email to info@thepageperspective.com. You can support my work by becoming a channel member by clicking the join button for as little as $1.99 a month, or by going to patreon.com/idatapodcast. You know, one of these days, I hope to hop on here and do a video about some breaking news on the latest cotton candy house development. Please tell me some of you are Norm Macdonald fans and understand this reference. But in the meantime, we are in this together, and I'm grateful you're here. Take care, and I'll see you next time.